box here under a false corporation.
Thank you, Mr. I'm just going to real quick go to Dr. Kinzer. Are you aware of anything that exists with MK and Naomi in your research? And if you could please press the button.
My understanding of MK Naomi is that it was a joint project between the military and the CIA. And there's a big difference because the MK Ultra project was aimed at seizing control of the minds of individuals. The Army was interested in something different, which was trying to use biological agents in warfare against entire populations. So MK Naomi is the place where these two goals overlapped.
And that was the 1953 Frank Olson death. Was that in a way tied to that from some chatter that we had seen in?
Exactly what the motivation was behind the decision about Frank Olson, if there was such a decision, is unknown.
My next question is also for you, sir. Operation Paperclip brought over 1,600 German scientists into the United States government after World War II, including individuals who had conducted human experimentation in concentration camps. The CIA and military were aware of their backgrounds and recruited them anyways. In your research, did you find direct documentation between Paperclip scientists and the development of MKUltra's experimental protocols, specifically the use of mescaline, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation, which were techniques also documented at Dachau?
Absolutely. Rep.Luna, who was the chief of biological weapons development for the Nazi government, came to work for the CIA. So did Walter Schreiber, who was the Surgeon General of the Nazi Army. I can just tell a brief story. When I was researching my book, I found what I think might be the first secret CIA prison or black site. It's a nice chalet in Germany. And the guy who now owns it took me into the basement. He said these were the cells where the MK Ultra officers, working side by side with Nazis, carried out those gruesome experiments, which were actually just continuations of the experiments that those Nazis had been conducting just a few years earlier right down the road.
Just for timeline and clarification, these experiments were happening after the Nuremberg trials, correct? So the CIA would have known that these were crimes against humanity.
I looked for an episode in which the Nuremberg doctrines were posted on the wall in some MK Ultra or CIA office, and I was never able to find any indication that those Nuremberg principles ever were even consulted, much less obeyed.
Thank you. My next question would be for either witness to comment, Dr. Kinzer or Mr. O'Neill. Both witnesses have written about the psychiatrist Louis Jolly West. Sidney Gottlieb, who ran MK Ultra program for the CIA, hired West as a contractor to conduct research for subproject 43, combining hypnotism, drugs, and sensory deprivation to create dissociative states, in which, to quote Mr. Kinzer in his book Poisoner in Chief, the human mind could be pulled away from its moorings. Following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, West psychiatrically examined Jack Ruby, then in prison for murdering the president accused of the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald, the assassin accused of murdering President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald. A report emerged from West's examination said that Ruby had suffered an acute psychotic break. Can you explain why Dr. West in particular was chosen to conduct an examination of Jack Ruby alone in his jail cell with no other psychologist present?
Be happy to. West inserted himself into the case when Ruby was the day of the shooting. The day after the shooting, West approached the judge in the preliminary hearings and asked to be assigned to the case. He was refused by the judge. After Ruby was convicted at his first trial, an associate of West, Dr. Hubert Winston Smith, who was a psychiatrist and an attorney, took over Ruby's defense for his appeal, and he had already discussed appointing Ruby to the case, or excuse me, West to the case. And as you said, West examined Ruby alone at the jail cell and emerged to announce that in the preceding 48 hours he had an acute psychotic break from which he would never recover. He had been declared competent to stand trial in the first time by a panel of, I think, 8 psychiatrists. This psychotic break lasted until his death in 1967. 2 months after West examined him, Ruby testified for the first time and only time to the Warren Commission. It was the first time he ever publicly was supposed to say what his reasons were for shooting Oswald. The testimony had to be halted because he was babbling incoherently, and as Arlen Specter, who was a counsel to the commission, wrote in his memoirs, he pulled him aside and said that they were cutting off the arms and legs of children in Albuquerque and El Paso, and he said he was making no sense whatsoever. West, in his letters to Gottlieb from 1953, discussed experiments where he would induce specific mental disorders in people without their awareness. A year before the Kennedy assassination, he publicly spoke in Oklahoma City and talked about his LSD experiments inducing psychiatric breaks and psychosis in people with the use of LSD, which of course later contradicted what he told the New York Times when he said he never used LSD in animal experimentation.
What happens when a government becomes so afraid of its enemies that it begins doing things it once condemned its enemies for doing? Lawmakers were asking about MK Naomi, Operation Paperclip, secret experiments, LSD, CIA safe houses, the death of Frank Olson, and the disturbing history of human experimentation during the Cold War. But beneath all of those subjects was one much bigger question. How far can a government go in the name of national security before the pursuit of security itself becomes a threat to the people it's supposed to protect? Let's look at what was actually said. A lawmaker begins by asking what the witnesses learned about MK Naomi and whether its activities may have been even more serious than what the public already knows about MK Ultra. The witness makes it clear that his research wasn't primarily focused on MK Naomi. His work concentrated more heavily on psychiatrist Louis Jolly West and the surviving documents connected to his research. And that matters. Because throughout this hearing, we repeatedly hear about missing records, destroyed documents, secret programs, and incomplete archives. Now, we need to be careful here. A missing document does not automatically prove a government conspiracy. That's not how serious investigative journalism works. When we're talking about controversial intelligence programs, the less documentation that survives, the harder it becomes to establish exactly who knew what, who authorized what, and who was responsible. And that's where the public has every reason to ask questions. The witnesses explain that MK Ultra and MK Naomi had different objectives. MK Ultra was heavily associated with attempts to manipulate or influence individual behavior and psychological states, while MK Naomi involved cooperation between the CIA and military interests concerning biological and chemical warfare. And when those two areas overlap, you suddenly have a very disturbing picture of Cold War intelligence research. But here's where I think we should push back against both extremes. On one side, there are people who want to dismiss everything associated with MK Ultra as nothing more than conspiracy theory. That's simply not a serious position. There is a documented historical record showing that MK Ultra existed and that unethical experiments were conducted. But on the other side, we shouldn't take every allegation surrounding MK Ultra and automatically treat it as established fact. That's equally irresponsible. After World War II, the United States brought German scientists and technical experts into the country because American officials wanted to obtain scientific knowledge before the Soviet Union could. But morally, the story becomes far more complicated when individuals with connections to Nazi Germany and the Nazi war machine enter the picture.
What an interesting connection. I'm out of time, but I'll be now recognizing Mr. Burleson from Missouri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your diligent work on this, and hopefully we will hear back from the CIA on those boxes of documents that have so many questions about. Dr. Kinzer and Mr. O'Neill, the CIA created MK Ultra in 1953, supposedly out of fear that the Soviet Union and China had developed mind control capabilities. Let me go back a little bit further. So one of my questions has to do with the event that happened in 1951 in August in France. There was a bakery that, I guess the people that lived in that community, over 250, some say 300 people were poisoned from the bread. It was determined that that was LSD that was causing all of these people hallucinate, some people died. Is there any connection, Dr. Kinzer, to that event? And was that something that either inspired the MK Ultra program or the MK Naomi program, or is that something that we were involved in even that early on?
I would turn that question back to you. I don't think anybody really knows the full story of what happened at that time in that town in France. That the United States could have been involved, that this could have been part of what was then called Operation Artichoke, the predecessor for MK Ultra, seems to me not beyond the realm of possibility. There's a lot of overlap between the ergot enzyme that is the basis of LSD and certain rye and wheat funguses that can be used in breads. Was that something intentional? Was it something the Americans were involved in? I have my suspicions, but just based on my background as a journalist, I don't operate on suspicions. So I would love to see more investigation of that episode.
My next question has to do with once the program began. I think one of the most shocking things we've determined is the Operation Midnight Climax that occurred in the early 1950s, 60s, where the CIA had safe houses. And there was, I would say, Dr. Kinzer, I mean, this is extremely disturbing behavior that was happening, where you had American citizens who were being lured into these brothels and then dosed with an hallucinogenic and then filmed during their sex acts. Was there anyone prosecuted for these crimes?
No, there have been no prosecutions for any crime related to MK Ultra, as far as I know. To me, the remarkable aspect of that Operation Midnight Climax was that there wasn't even the pretense of scientific experimentation. The person watching behind the one-way mirror was a grossly overweight drug officer sitting on a portable toilet and drinking cocktails out of a pitcher. There was nobody there that was a scientist or somebody who understood sexual behavior or human psychology. So there was no science involved in it at all. I can add a little footnote. When I was researching Poisoner in Chief, I came across a document in which one of the officers involved in setting up that program, Operation Midnight Climax, said that Sidney Gottlieb himself used to fly from Washington out to inspect the project regularly and always asked that women be provided for him. So
that was my next question. Do you think that the agents were involved in the sexual encounters?
Well, and could that have actually been the reason why the bordello was opened? There was no prospect of any serious scientific result out of that project, given the personnel who were overseeing it. So those CIA officers, particularly Gottlieb, involved in overseeing Operation Midnight Climax, certainly were able to take advantage of what it offered.
Thank you. And my last question, first I want to say thank you to Mr. O'Neill. The book Chaos, I checked it out from the Library of Congress and greatly appreciate your work there. I was intrigued by one of the statements that you made based on your research that the MK Ultra program, they were actually successfully able to replace memories. And because of that, I'm wondering if, and Dr. Kinzer, you can chime in if you have any knowledge of this, did the program continue, and do you think that the program in some aspect is still continuing today?
You're asking if the program continued after 1973 when it was halted, supposedly. I honestly, that's a question I'm asked at almost every appearance I do. Is it happening today? Did it continue? I don't know. I can't imagine that it didn't, though, because the technology that they worked to establish over 20, 25 years and spent more money on than any operation the CIA had ever conducted was successful. I imagine it's being used. I have no evidence of it being used, so it's a complete assumption.
I would just add that one of the letters to which Mr. O'Neill referred contains a quote from Mr. Gottlieb saying that these experiments were necessary, quote, in these times. I think it's important to put yourself back in that mindset where the United States felt that it was under such overwhelming threat that the loss of a few lives or a few hundred lives was a small price to pay. Commitment to a great cause is one of the most fundamental justifications for committing immoral acts. And patriotism is among the most noble of causes. It can be twisted and it can be used as an excuse to carry out research under the guise that this is simply research we're doing to protect ourselves against others. And I think that is a mindset that may still be active in some parts of our government.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Madam Chair. My time has expired.
The witnesses were asked whether German scientists recruited by the United States after World War II had any connection to techniques later associated with programs like MKUltra. One witness described individuals who had worked under Nazi Germany and later became connected with American intelligence. He then recounted his discovery of what he believes may have been an early CIA secret facility in Germany, one that allegedly contained underground cells where experiments were conducted. If the evidence confirms that intelligence personnel conducted experiments involving former Nazi-linked scientists after the Nuremberg trials, then we have a very serious historical and ethical problem. Because the Nuremberg trials weren't simply about punishing Nazi officials. They established principles concerning human experimentation and informed consent. So the question becomes, did American intelligence officials understand those principles, and if so, did they follow them? The hearing then moved to psychiatrist Louis Jolly West, whose work involved hypnosis, drugs and altered psychological states. His examination of Jack Ruby, the man who killed Lee Harvey Oswald following President John F. Kennedy's assassination, was also discussed. Ruby was reportedly examined privately by West, who concluded that Ruby had experienced an acute psychotic episode. Does that prove intelligence agencies manipulated Ruby? No. And we shouldn't pretend that it does. Then came another historical mystery, the 1951 Pont Saint-Esprit incident in France, where hundreds of people reportedly became violently ill and experienced hallucinations. There have been theories connecting the incident to LSD and even possible American intelligence involvement. But I found one part of the testimony particularly important. The witness essentially said, "We don't know." And frankly, that is the kind of answer we need more